And we're back with the man, the myth, the legend, the guy who you either love him or hate him. Most kind of hate him. Andrew Jackson, who's going to completely transform politics in our country. It's kind of the birth, the founder, I guess, of the Democrat Party. Even though a lot of things have changed and we don't really have that Democrat versus Republican just yet. All right, so let's get into it. Remember, when we last talked about Andrew Jackson, he was losing the election of 1824, even though he really won, but the congressional election went against him. One of those weird elections in our history. But he gets the last laugh. 1828, there's no doubt. Jackson's going to defeat John Quincy Adams. It's decisive, 178 to 83. The popular vote actually is a little bit closer than that, but he is going to become president on a groundswell of new people being able to vote. All right, universal white male suffrage. All right, so America at the time of Jackson, we've got increased enfranchisement, and he's definitely going to play to the common man. He's seen as the common man's champion, especially the Southern common man. So he's going to play that up and really work for that base that he's created. Increasing sectionalism, not directly over slavery. Right now it's mainly over a tariff issue and westward movement of slavery. The immigration of Americans to Texas during Jackson's administration, and he's also going to be president when that war is kicking off. And he's going to have significant tensions with southeastern tribes, especially the Cherokee and the Seminole that he's dealing with. All right, so getting into his presidency, the domestic policy, this is getting politics are getting really dirty around this time. Remember the election of 1824, 1828 had been divisive, especially 1828. Now we're starting to see these strong political parties with their conventions, even though I think the first convention is 1832, but we're starting to get more organization within the political parties. Again, the candidates themselves aren't campaigning. They're not out there making speeches all the time, but they definitely have people working for them. The Adams people are really hitting Jackson hard and going after his family too. They're bringing up the bigamy of Rachel Donaldson, or the at least supposed bigamy. Again, Western frontier, the rules aren't the same, culture is much different. But Rachel Donaldson Jackson is going to die of heart attack, I believe, between the time that Jackson wins the presidency and then takes office. So he's entering the office with a heavy heart, and he says, I'm not going to forgive those who basically killed my wife through their gossip. Now, when he becomes president, one of his cabinet members, a guy named Eaton, I'm trying to remember his first name, but it's not coming to mind. His wife is being ostracized because there's rumors that she was a prostitute, and the wives of the rest of the cabinet members aren't inviting her to things, aren't really welcoming her into their circle. They see it as trying to protect the virtue and honor of all American women. Jackson sees this as just gossip and basically the extension of Rachel Donaldson's story, of her bigamy story, that's going to be so divisive. And it's going to lead to a lot of his cabinet stepping down over this issue. One of the people that doesn't step down is going to be Martin Van Buren, and his political stock is going to rise because of that, even though his vice president, John C. Calhoun, wants Martin Van Buren's political career ended because he's sticking up for Peggy Eaton. But this is where Jackson, because he's having so much division within his actual cabinet, he's going to start to get unofficial advisors. Now remember, your actual cabinet is subject to congressional approval, but you can get advice from anybody. So he's going to keep a close group of advisors and people that he welcomes their opinions. And it's going to be called the kitchen cabinet. All right, so let's move on. Spoil system, he's going to be the guy who kind of revolutionizes how people get their jobs in the government. The idea before had been, if you were doing your job as a tax collector, you should still have that job after a new president comes into office. Andrew Jackson, remember, he's playing to a base of underprivileged Westerners who want to be more integrated into the government. So they're asking for jobs. They're asking for those favors in return for their support. They're asking for jobs in this government. It's an immense amount of jobs that the president has to actually hire and fire people from. So he plays into that. So jobs now are becoming ways of rewarding loyalty in these parties, and the power of these political parties is going to start to solidify. We're going to see the Whigs are going to break down, mainly because of some north-south issues, but also they're standing against this whole government jobs to loyal members. Plus, there's a lot of division of some of their political members have been former Democrats, and they believe that they're still Democrats. But there's time and place for that. We're going to get there. Jackson's Indian policy, this is what he's probably most well known for. He's most well known for the Trail of Tears. Even though it actually isn't Jackson who is president when that occurs, he's known for kind of setting those conditions up. His idea about Indian removal is that they need to move west. He's going to try to sell this idea to the tribes is that their culture is under attack from connections to white traders, white farmers, and that if they move further west to the Mississippi, they'll be able to protect their culture. At the same time, he's moving through Congress to try to force this issue. In 1830, he's going to get the Indian Removal Act passed through Congress, which is going to allow the federal government to buy land from the tribes in exchange for their moving west. So kind of putting his idea into practice. He's going to get some opposition from the Supreme Court, not technically due to the Indian Removal Act, but it's basically shots fired on the Indian Removal Act. Worcester versus Georgia is about Georgia breaking a treaty with the Cherokee to try to force them to move west. The Supreme Court says that Georgia can't make or break a treaty with the tribes because the tribes are essentially a foreign country, and the only part of the government that can negotiate a treaty with a foreign nation is the federal government, not the state government. So they strike that down. Jackson's infuriated by the ruling. A lot of people say he said John Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it. That's not exactly what he said, but the point kind of gets through. Jackson is not going to enforce Worcester versus Georgia. He's going to allow the states to kind of push around these tribes if they need to. And kind of the Trail of Tears, really what happens is this Treaty of New Echota. Treaty of New Echota, the United States government is going to sign an agreement. They're trying to encourage these tribes to move west. So they're looking for anybody to sign a treaty with. Now, Cherokee, you got to remember tribal governments. We always take a look at who is the chief of this tribe. It's not exactly how it works. There's usually many different chiefs of different villages, but there's a council of paramount chiefs. The U.S. is going to sign an agreement with John Ridge, who is a chief of the Cherokee, but he's a minor chief of the Cherokee. That doesn't matter to the U.S. government. They've got an agreement on paper that says that the Cherokee will move west, and they're going to run with that. And even though John Ross is actually the paramount chief of the Cherokee tribe, his hand is kind of forced that he's got to agree to this, because if they don't move, it's going to be military coming in and forcing them to move. Eventually that is what will happen. They're going to kind of monitor the Trail of Tears, but it could get a lot worse. Alright, so we got a lot of domestic policy. In fact, if you want to scratch out foreign policy and move that down further so that you have your foreign policy is a really small one and your domestic policy is larger, that is completely fine. Do what you got to do. Alright, Tariff Crisis. The Tariff of 1828, remember, tariffs are hated by the South, loved by the North. High tariff on imported goods. Many Southerners were going to expected that Jackson was going to try to repeal or block it because he is a Southerner. He's the champion of the Southern common man, right? but he's going to actually enforce the tariff. He sees that he is the arbiter of the federal government and that the federal government's law is supreme. And people, even within his own administration, didn't like that. His vice president is going to essentially go to war with him over it. John C. Calhoun is going to go to South Carolina and try to nullify the tariff through the South Carolina Exposition and Protest. Jackson is going to get Congress to pass the force bills to allow him to use the military to enforce this tariff if South Carolina tries to stop it. If fight comes, we could have a civil war here in 1832 over an import tax. Both sides eventually are going to back down. They're looking for a way out of this. Jackson has to save face, has to make sure that this tariff that the federal law is carried out, and South Carolina is looking for this tariff to go away. In the end, we're going to get a compromise tariff brokered by that great compromiser, Henry Clay. Dude tries so hard. He'll never be president, but he tries. Compromise tariff 1832 is going to reduce the tariff rates and then call for further reductions every year to get them underneath 20%. So it gives both of them a chance to kind of back off. The other major thing in domestic policy that Jackson is known for is the bank crisis. He was very open that he wanted to kill the Bank of the U.S. The Bank of the U.S. is up for rechartering in 1836. It had a 20-year charter from Congress, but to make this a political point going into 1832 election, Congress is going to vote for a rechartering of the bank early. When they do, Jackson vetoes it. Says nope, veto. Other presidents had vetoed before. This is the first time Congress can't override it. They don't have enough political will to override Jackson's veto. So the Bank of the United States is broken up. Right? The question then becomes, where is the federal money going to go to? It had been put into this Bank of the United States. Where is it going now? Jackson decides to put it into state banks. That's where the federal money is going to go. These state banks have less regulation than that Bank of the United States. So they're making loans, especially out in the West, to people who are right on the edge of being able to pay them back or not, especially when it's coming to speculating on Western lands. And some of those bad loans come up. They have to call them in early. It causes a panic. Jackson is on his way out of office. The response isn't that robust to the Panic of 1837, and that's going to dog Martin Van Buren's presidency as well. The specie circular issue here is that since they're having so many bad loans for the Western lands, the federal government is going to say that, hey, to buy Western lands, you have to have gold or silver. We're not accepting bank notes. You have to have gold or silver. When that happens, there's going to be a run on gold and silver. People in the West don't have it, so that's going to cause even more economic problems out there. All right, so some of those economic policies, Jackson kind of shoots himself in the foot with. All right, as far as foreign policy goes, Jackson's not known for his foreign policy. There is going to be a trade deal with Thailand, Great Britain, and Russia that are signed during Jackson's administration. That trade deal with Great Britain is going to reopen trade with the British West Indies, and he's going to attempt to get Texas into the Union through a purchase. I'm trying to remember the amount. It's not coming to me, but Mexico balks at it. They say, no, this is our territory. You're going to have to up that price if you're even going to be serious about buying Texas from. So that Texas issue that we're going to get into with Texas annexation, he's trying to avoid that, but he just isn't able to get that through, and Mexico's not going to accept it. All right, so we're done with Jackson. On to Martin Van Buren next.